Great to see you all. Surprised so many of you are still alive. Yeah, on that cheery note. So again, I'm delighted. I feel very privileged to get to talk to people while we're doing these things. But I'm a historian by trade. And the music industry of Ireland is my special area. So, one of the things you do if you're writing about the Irish music industry, you go through hot press, you go through all the back issues, you'll see some names, you'll see some gigs that took place. And that's about 10%. There's so much else that went on. And the deeper you go, you realise that the universities completely transformed this country. And I don't mean that they just gave people an education, but a lot of the students probably remember more from their college days of what they did outside of the lectures. So, Ross, can I start with you? Like, when you rocked up to third level, was music your main passion, or did something happen to inspire you?
It was a big passion. I mean, my first gig was Roy Orbison at the Adelphi. I was 10, and I just couldn't believe it out of my mind. And I think I ended up running a gig at school. We had 400 people for our costume and a trench band, and that would have been sort of 73, 74, my last year in school. And I went to every gig I could. I went to see Rory Gallagher a few times, saw Thin Lizzy a few times, and saw as many local bands as I could, Jimmy Savile and everybody else, and loved it. And started going to gigs, which I soon realised a couple of years later when I went to Trinity, that Ian and his colleagues were putting together in Trinity, in the exam hall and in other venues in the college. So it was a very exciting thing to be part of. And in fact, I don't know if Ian remembers this, but I had a year between school and college, and I remember going into Trinity one night to some event, I can't remember what it was, and coming out through front gate, I met Ian and Paul Tipping putting up posters for a gig, which they were running, and that was the first time we met.
Right, so you get to Trinity and you see that there are people like Ian and Bill Graham before him, was involved. And where did you decide to get involved? Like to move from being an audience member to thinking, I want to take part?
I asked, I think it was Kieran Owens was probably the ENS officer in my first year, and I went in to see Kieran Owens in the student union, and I said, can I help? Because I had that school experience. I'd already been a DJ. I was a DJ from about 14, and therefore I wanted to be in that scene. I felt like going to university was something I had to do, but it wasn't really what I wanted to pursue. The music scene you talk about that we helped to create, it didn't exist, and therefore there was nothing to latch on to or to say, yes, that's a company I could join, or there was nothing like that. Obviously we knew of, Rory had gone to London, Thin Lizzy had gone to London. We knew there were people working with those artists, and you mentioned Paul Charles, who I think you probably put on Frock with Paul Charles or something like that. Would have been the first experience with Paul.
Oh, no, my experience with Paul goes back a long way.
Before that,
1973 I would have started. When we first started trying to get bands into Ireland, I sussed out Paul Charles at some stage. And we ended up, as I said, with this working with colleges in the north and UCC. Because as you explained, at the time we had bombs in Dublin. I mean, I remember being involved in that. I'm sorry, this is very fucking middle class Trinity kind of shite. They paid their money. That's what they're getting. Okay. Well, you know what you're getting then. No, I remember we ran outdoor shows in College Park long before MCD did or anything like that. Free shows during the summer. And I remember, fortunately it was an off day, it was a day we didn't have a gig. I remember bombs going off all over Dublin that day, and walking out and seeing, walking out the back of Trinity and seeing
just bits of people everywhere. And the Trinity Ball was 3 days after that. Every fucking band coming in, that was it. And that was followed by the Miami, and that was the end of it. There was no more touring acts in Ireland whatsoever. And end of story. Nobody would cross the water. And so we ended up, we'd already got this tentative connection with Paul Charles, so we ended up, basically we said to them, the only place you're going to be able to play a gig in Ireland is inside the colleges. It's just not safe outside. We know these are neutral territories. None of the paramilitaries at any stage ever got involved on campuses in doing anything for some reason. But Queen's and the Northern Ireland Poly and whatever it's called in Coleraine, the NUU in Coleraine, and so on, they were off limits seemed to be off limits for bombing and general paramilitary activities. So we were able to put together a touring system that bands could afford to come in from abroad and make 3 or 4 gigs in Ireland, make it worth their time. There's a very hungry audience out there, but there were no commercial promoters at that stage. I mean, Jim Aiken, who was Peter Aiken's father, was Aiken Promotions. I mean, he did what he could, but basically nothing. Dennis Desmond, who runs MCD, he was also in UCC promoter and booking bands as well. So it was, the only action was in the colleges, and then punk happened. And that was a whole different ball game, because all of a sudden people came out of the woodwork, and they all started playing gigs everywhere. And it was a whole different thing, and especially in the north, which was a huge hive of activity going on in Northern Ireland in '77, and so on. Again, completely unexpected. So, and complete diversion to what you thought was going on.
I do remember an early gig, which is quite important, and I mentioned it to Pete earlier. You and I and Paul Tipping and various other people went to a party in Bray on a Saturday night, and we stayed over in the house. It was a very late night. And the Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m, the Starlight Hotel in Bray, and I said to everybody at lunchtime, I know there's this band, the Radiators from Space, they're playing in the Starlight Hotel. We all have to go, because it's important we see this band. We were already alive to the punk scene in London and from the music press and John Peel and so forth. But that gig blew our minds. And we said that was really the moment where I think it's fair to say we all agreed that we needed to bring these bands to Trinity and to the other universities.
Okay, and just to put it, I know no one in their right mind would go to Bray now. But there was a time where there would be 2,000 people outside the venue. You know, in the show band eras, so Irish people wanted to go out and dance. They wanted to go out and have fun. In the mid-1960s, on St. Stephen's Night, St. Stephen's Night was the big dancing night. 750,000 people were out dancing to show bands on that one night. That's 50% of our adult population. There's no other country where entertainment and dancing and socialising. But if you go 30 years before that, it was against the law in this country to hold a dance in your house. If a boy and a girl were caught kissing, the sentence was a month in prison. Now, nothing more than the kissing District Justice Goff in Blackrock County Louth did the test case for that. But take me back to where you got interested in music and kind of youth culture, because you're not from Dublin. Where do you get exposed before you go to university to the idea that music is fun?
Well, I've been away at boarding school in England, so I'm good Anglo-Irish stock, you understand, and that's what would happen to us. We got sent away to boarding school, and then on to Trinity, if not Oxford. But in my case, I probably wasn't smart enough, so I went to Trinity.
And was there any music in boarding?
Yeah, there was tons of it. Because when I went to England, I was in the middle of the blues boom. And all of a sudden you had all these blues performers, and the better known people you will know, like Savoy Brown, John Mayall, and Fleetwood Mac and those. But there's a whole upsurge in sort of rock-based, blues-based rock And out of that you got the Yardbirds, and people called the New Yardbirds, who became Led Zeppelin and so on. So I was inculcated in all that thing, and people like Creed and so on. So I was in that whole British sort of rock thing at that stage. So when I came into Trinity, I blundered into the guy who was running the gigs at the time, and he was a medical student, and he fucked up his medical course, and he was going to be thrown out. So he truly was thrown out. And because I was the only one standing around who knew anything about music, who was working, and they said, "You're doing it." And I started doing it, in 1972.
And who else was around? Like, who do you remember from those days who was active in trying to build a music scene?
Pat Egan, Jim Aiken, as you probably know, there was there was no clubs at this stage. There'd been the beat clubs in the 60s in Dublin, and there really were no clubs in the early 70s. There was a few, there was a meeting place open, there was a bit in Slattery's, but there was no such thing as music clubs. That again came along with the punk thing. You've got to remember, in 1977 or so, the whole music scene in Ireland changed completely. From being nothing going on. Partly the Rats, the Radiators, and people like this, who changed it all. It's all suddenly, the lights went on, and it wasn't Dark Ireland anymore. It was a completely different ballgame. I have bands everywhere. I would have had difficulty when I was running gigs in the 70s. I would have difficulty getting quality Irish acts. We played a lot of jazz and folk because there wasn't good rock bands. I was very happy to put on the Chieftains and Paul Brady and the Bothy Band and Plank Steve. Does anybody remember any of these bands? You're talking Cream, all of this stuff. But there wasn't. You could not film a year in a college with rock bands or music or guitar bands. They just weren't there. When you came to 77, you couldn't swing a fucking shitty stick for somebody with a guitar appearing. It was everywhere.
Yeah, but if you couldn't swing a stick without hitting one, it's because of people like the two of you who decided this stuff is valid, it's exciting. The Irish Times is the first newspaper of record in the world to interview the Clash. So, there's and obviously hot press is coming along. There's a bit of a movement towards, but it's young people like you who decided we're not going to wait for Pat Egan or for Jim Aiken, who tended to do the bigger gigs. He doesn't watch the Top of the Pops and thinking, oh, the X-Ray Specs, they look good, I must get them over. So when did punk hit both of you? Ross, what did it feel like?
I think for me, it's like the precursor has to be Dr. Feelgood.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and just the idea that we had got away from 19 minutes of guitar noodling to actually something that happened in 2.5 minutes and was mind blowing.
You had Beesmack Honey, Brinsley Sports, those kind of bands. Pub rock, it was called at the time. It was a very strange term.
They were playing pubs, I guess. But Eddie and the Hot Rods were also the suggestion of something kind of edgier coming, something more dangerous. And I think the same thing that was happening was also an expansion of musical interest. Personally, and I think with Ian, with Paul Tipping, who was the Ents officer, 77, 78, and our social circle, we were also listening to a lot of reggae, a lot of funk. So we quite a wide view of music.
P-Funk,
yeah. And in fact, there's a P-Funk connection to the Vipers. I'll explain in a minute. But
Parliament psychedelic, George Clinton. Okay.
Yeah,
got all that.
Yeah.
And I think we were determined to do something quite seriously mind-blowing with that 77-78 season. So we ended up, the Clash was our first gig. We then had the Stranglers, we had the Buzzcocks, we had the Damned, we had the Adverts, we had the Radiators. And in the middle of all that, something interesting happened, which was I had to go to CBS Records and collect an advance copy of the Clash album. I met Jackie Hayden in CBS Records, who took me around the warehouse.
And I said, what are all these records here? And he said, oh, these are all deletions, we can't sell them. And I said, well, these look like really interesting records. One of the first things I picked up was a sliced lemon on. And I took a whole bunch of records off him, he sold me for 50p. I went into the Student Union bookshop, and Mike, who was running the bookshop, I said, can I put a rack of records here in your shop? So what then happened, that was next door to the Ents office, and people would come in from bands trying to talk to Ents, see the record store. I'd be there when I was supposed to be at lectures. And that's how I met Paul Boyle. So Paul came in to try and get a gig for the Vipers, and I had a chat with him, and it was before the Clash gig. And I then remember there was no guest list for the Clash gig, absolutely no guest tickets whatsoever. I think we let in Joe Breen from the Times, we had Tom McPhail, and maybe there was somebody from in Dublin. There were about 4 or 5 guests, but they were all genuine media, and they were all covering the gig, and they all went with front pages. The daily papers, the evening papers went with front pages the next day, as you mentioned. But that record store became a kind of channel that people could use to access us, because we were then in the office next door, and Mike would be selling the records, or I'd be there occasionally. Paul came in. I remember Adam Clayton coming in the school uniform. All kinds of people wanting, and of course you two got a lunchtime gig at the end of that 77, 78.
Of course, because we were running these shows in the exam hall in Trinity, which is a fairly ornate 18th century building, there was a certain amount of damage done to it. It didn't go down great with the college authorities. So after the Stranglers, well, we had a farcical outing with the Stranglers, which I particularly remember the Vipers very heroically. Anyway, the college refused us permission for 2 shows, so we ran 1 show, and in desperation we tried to use a venue called the Tivoli, which at the time was a disused cinema. It's now a hotel, of course, yeah. But that's another day's work. And anyway, young Charlie McNally, who some people will remember, the late Charlie McNally, it was one of our earlier encounters with Charlie. Anyway, he came up with the idea of using the Tivoli, so we got up there anyway and tried to clean the place up, and the Stranglers came in, had one look and said, we're fucking out of here. And so we ended up with a sold-out show of a Saturday night, 600 people outside, and so the Vipers very courageously played a free show, and we persuaded people not to fucking trash the whole place, which we just about got away with. Anyway, the whole gig fell apart. The Stranglers, conveniently, their truck broke down on the way back from Cork, and the gig was cancelled. They were on the fucking ferry before. They were on the ferry before they even made the phone call to me, as far as I could gather. Yeah. Anyway, it dribbled on with the college authorities, and they got really pissed off with us, not surprisingly. So they introduced a noise limit. They put a decibel level on, and we had reasonably soft gigs, and then we had the Buzzcocks. College authorities came in, a man called the senior dean, and he had got an engineer with a noise meter, measured the noise and went, too loud. We were given a limit, you've broken the limit, turn it off. And I said, I'm not fucking turning it off. I've got a crowd in here, they're going to tear the fucking place apart. So anyway, we turned it down as low as we could. No question of turning it off. So anyway, next day, phone call arrives into the student union office. You're from the man in question, the senior dean. He goes, your next show is cancelled, you've broken the agreement. And we said, okay, sorry about that. And we waited till we got the evening papers on the Monday, and Paul went to them all, and then, so we got the front page of the evening papers on the Monday, we got all the national dailies the next morning, front page, pictures, and the headline was more or less, Chieftains considered too loud. Chieftains banned for being too loud. Because the dude in question had never asked us what the next show was, so we said, next show cancelled, so we bombarded them in the papers. Of course, the college climbed down, the Chieftains played Julie, Paddy Maloney, pictures of Paddy Maloney there with his pipes on the exam hall roof. Where did his pipes damage the exam hall? Anyway, it was a major fucking climb down for the college. It was a public relations disaster for them. Bit of a Pyrrhic victory for us because we weren't able to really run any more gigs after that. But we made our point, and that was I was fairly punky out.
It was very lucky, and the best newspaper headline was in Trinity News, the student newspaper at the time, and it was Buzzcocks bollocksed by the board. at that moment, the adverts you could put on JCR and that's instead. So you kind of, you didn't have Trinity kind of with you, but not so behind you. And the guy with the decibel meter. Now this is only